We're afraid of what people will think, or we're afraid we're not good enough, or we're afraid we're too much. And so we hold ourselves back. When we do that, we're muting ourselves. And there are too many people that are muting themselves in the world. And I, for so many years, was one of them. I've discovered the power of unmuting myself, of showing up in the world in a way that is joyfully expressed and boldly alive. That's something that has been so important to me as I've discovered how freeing it is to be unmuted, to unmute our body and to unmute our ideas and to unmute our desires, to unmute ourselves in relationships and at work, and to be our own advocates and to ask for what we want and need. The unmuted life is a life that is fully alive and fully expressed and confident and clear. And to me, it's the only way that I know how to live now. I know what it's like to feel confined and stuck and small and silenced. And I also know what it feels like to be expressed and alive and joyful and present and seen. And it's so much better of a life to be unmuted. And that is what I want to bring you into. Are you ready to unmute yourself? Let's make it happen. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to another Unmuted Monday. I'm your host, Rachel Druckenmiller. I want to give some shout outs to the folks who are in the comments here. Veda, so good to see you here. Veda is one of those people who is so consistent and so thoughtful and so intentional about sending those messages that Kevin talked about last week, of reaching out in the LinkedIn inbox and sending a very specific message to let you know that, hey, this thing really affected me today in a positive way. Thank you for doing what you do. She's such a source of encouragement and affirmation and validation. And so Veda, I just want to let you know that I appreciate you and how you show up and how thoughtfully you show up. I know we've got Robert who is joining us. Welcome, Robert Box. Good to have you here. Scott, this is going to be a great conversation. Scott, welcome. You all are going to just be ready to grab a pen and paper and maybe a box of tissues. I don't even know what else to say about what you need to grab for today's show, but we always make sure that we have conversations that are meaningful, something that you can take away and have a moment of reflection about your own life, so that you leave here and you feel more emboldened and empowered to be unmuted. So welcome. I want to invite us, as we're going to be talking about storytelling and sharing our stories today. One of the things I'd like to have you all do is drop in the chat, where did your story begin? Where did the story of you begin? So where were you born? If you want to drop in the chat, drop in the comments, let us know where you were born. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, where I didn't get too far. Spoiler alert. I live about 20 minutes outside of Baltimore now, but I love it here. And Beth, welcome, Beth. Good to have you here. David, welcome. Tim was born in Astoria in Queens, New York City. Feel free to drop in the comments where you were born. Where did the story of you begin? I know there's a little bit of a delay from me sharing this to you all dropping in the comments. So welcome again, Beth and David. Sharon, welcome. Sharon, Elkton, Maryland. That's where my aunt lives, Sharon. It's a town most people have not heard of, but I know exactly where that is. Beth, Newark, Delaware. Beth, thanks for sharing that. Scott is from Seattle, Washington. Let's see, Richmond Hill, Ontario, Canada. Lebanon, hey, Melinda, good to have you here. Lebanon, New Hampshire is where Melinda's from. Sharon, Portland, Oregon. Sally, Orange, California. Michael, Detroit, Michigan. If you're just joining us, we're dropping in the comments and sharing, where did the story of you begin? Where were you born? Storytelling is so powerful, and we're going to be talking about that today. You're going to be hearing a series of stories from our guests today, and I know that you're all going to really get a lot out of the conversation we're going to have. So that's what we're doing in the comments, in case you're wondering, what are all these people dropping in? So Veda, South America is where your story began, currently living in Canada. Janine, welcome. Janine has an adorable daughter who I've gotten video messages from. Waterford, Connecticut. Ali from Syria, Damascus. And David was born in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. We've got another from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wonderful. Wonderful. So today, we're going to be talking about storytelling and how you can, one of the different ways that you can even become a better storyteller. And part of that is by being willing to share our stories. I have this little plaque at my desk. I like to surround myself with words that inspire me. And this plaque says, "Your beautifully messy, complicated story matters. Tell it." And I think that that's the power of coming together in this community, is that we get to hear stories of people that have been through some hard things. I mean, we all have, and we get to learn from each other, and we get to feel validated by each other, and we feel less alone when we hear other people's stories. So a couple of quick announcements. One, we've got 2 more shows left before the end of the year. My next guest in 2 weeks is going to be my dad, Michael Bryant, who some of you are familiar with. And then our final show for the year is going to be a Unmute Yourself. I think we called it a very, very merry unmuted Christmas or something, where I'm going to just be singing y'all a bunch of songs. This is what we're going to do for the final episode. And that's going to be on December 19th. So stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up. I also wanted to mention just a quick aside, a couple of books. I'm a big reader. And we're going to drop a link in the comments too. I have a reading list on my website. If you're looking to do some shopping for people, for a friend, for a coworker, for your boss, there's a few books that I've read this year that have really stood out. One is called Unreasonable Hospitality by a guy named Will Guidara, who ran a restaurant called 11 Madison Park in New York City. Phenomenal book on the power of giving people more than they expect. So that's one. There's another book I've read by Daniel Pink, The Power of Regret. And he is going to be on this show on January 9th. Super stoked about that. And then the last book, which I've mentioned on here before, I'm going to mention again, it's all tabbed up. It's called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate. So 3 books that are all very different, very, very different books, very powerful books that have the potential to transform the way that you show up in the world, the way that you interact with people, and even the way that you lead. So just wanted to mention that out. If you're looking for some gift ideas, we've dropped the link to that in the chat. And with that, what I'd like to do now is I want to introduce you to today's guest. So to know how to express yourself is a great miracle that helps you live your story. From stages to podcasts, from meetings to casual catch-ups, we're all seeking to be heard. But first, we must honor the storyteller inside of us. My guest today is one of the leading experts on self-expression, storytelling, and public speaking. He works with authors, entrepreneurs, industry leaders, as well as brands like Disney and Adobe to help them unleash the storyteller inside. He's an author, TEDx executive producer, and Hollywood media trainer who runs the Mic Drop Method, a public speaking school. Please give a warm welcome to Mike Ganino. Mike, welcome to the show.
What a lovely honor to have you introducing me. What a gorgeous, gorgeous thing. Thank you so much for that. And by the way, I'm so impressed with like the global audience that's here today. Like all over the world, people are tuning in, including, I think, Sally from my backyard over here of Orange, California. I'm in Whittier, California today. So what a cool thing, and how heartwarming and absolutely filling to be welcomed by you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so excited that you're here. And I know that everyone's going to they're here for it. Like this community of people, community is powerful. And this community of people is an incredible community. And so just all of you know that. Thank you for always making everyone who's here. Thank you for always making our guests feel so welcome, because it really does make a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's a great little, it's the same thing as going to someone's house. And yes, sure, the host, the hostess, their generosity is so important. Their unreasonable hospitality is so important. But so are the other people at the party.
Yeah, acknowledge that they're there.
Yeah.
It matters. And I just want to share a little bit about how we met. So we first connected 4 years ago, and it was an inflection point in my life where I knew that I was not happy in my corporate job. I knew I wanted to make a change, and I had this opportunity to basically clear out my bank account and sign up for a professional speaking training. And I was in Philadelphia. We were at the Kimmel Center in Philadelphia, and there was a class. I think I've shared this with you maybe one time, but you were doing one of the master classes around improv, and you'll probably remember this prompt better than I will, but we had an opportunity to partner up with somebody, and we had to share it's like a 4-minute version of a story or something. And we had to keep alternating back where our partner would repeat back what they heard, then in 2 minutes, and then we had to give like a 1-minute version. Am I explaining this remotely accurately?
Yeah, that works. That's good.
Okay. And my understanding is that the goal was like to get to the essence of that story and that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was getting it down to even like one sentence. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, you could do this. This gets really like quantum, right? Of like the distance between my fingers is not actually 0. You could keep dividing this down by half, by half, by half. The difference between 0 and 1, you could keep going. It never gets to 0. The space between 0 and 1 is always something if you keep dividing it by half. And so the idea of this exercise is you start off with some, and the timing is always a bit arbitrary based on how long do you have. So you say, start with 4 minutes or 3 minutes, usually not more than that because people then go off and they share something and the person listens and they reiterate it back to them, but in like 2 minutes or something like that, or with a character, with the persona. So we'll often do it like an evangelical preacher, do it like a 3rd grade teacher, explain it like you're talking to someone who fell asleep under a tree 300 years ago. The goal is 2 things. One is to have them kind of get down to like the core of like, what are you saying and what am I hearing? And the other part of it is to expand the available options for self-expression because we get so stuck playing one key in our life. And yet we have this whole range. And so sometimes by having to do it in a shorter amount of time or do it faster, do it slower, do it as a character, we unlock voice, movement, things that we didn't use before that now are a possibility for us.
And that is exactly what I experienced. You said unlocking voice. The story I shared, I was matched up with a guy named James Leith. And I shared the story of how I found my voice in gospel choir in college and how that was the first time I really let myself pursue, like, to be seen as a singer publicly because it was something I'd avoided for so long. And I told the story of how it happened and how I held myself back and finally took the stage and did it, and how I now use it, as like my husband and I would, sing together at church and all this other stuff. I wasn't using it at all in my career at that point. It was just something that was fun for me to do on the side. And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, you share that story. You must share that story every time you're on stage." I was like, "I've literally never shared that story publicly." Wow. And he was like, you should. And so the thing that was the game changer for me 2 months later, when we were all together in New Jersey in person for the first time, was when I was sharing that story. And then I actually sang on stage and integrated it into my speaking, which I never thought of doing before. And it was that exercise that brought me to the point of starting to integrate that story, which has been so much of kind of the crux of my unmuting experience and journey. So I want to thank you for that activity that 4 years ago, turned into this.
Yeah, I guess I don't know whether I forgot or I didn't register it, but I didn't realize that. That's because I know now what you've done with it and how you've taken it and where you want to go next with it or where you're going to go next with it. And so that's so cool to hear that was the beginning of like even putting it out there that you could sing, and you could sing, by the way.
Thanks.
You could sing.
Thanks. I shared that there's a guy named Will Sullivan who might be here today. He's an awesome guy. He's in New York City. And he had me on his show last week, and I told that bit. I've told it one time on here and did the singing bit when Darcy Webb was on the show and we talked about unmuting your voice and all of that. So much gratitude to you. You never know what a brief conversation with essentially a stranger could lead to somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
So that's,
I think it goes to show you too that we are think of all the things that had to come together for that to come together, right? And so this idea that we're so separate from each other and that we're all living our own little separate things is just preposterous to me, because so many things had to come together for that moment to happen. And James had to be listening to you in a certain way and be moved to feel safe to tell you that thing. And I had to be there to do that. And the organizers of the event had to be there to do that. And you had to hear about it. All of the things that had to come together for this moment. And so I think it's a little bit of a sign of we're just not separate from each other. And everyone at all times is looking to show you yourself if you're open to it.
Everyone at any time is looking to show you yourself if you're open to it. Yes, to reflect back.
Yeah. The mirror.
Here's what I see, and it's such a gift to have people that are willing to do that. It's such a gift because we can get an awakening and an awareness that we might not otherwise have at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's one of the big things with public speaking that we think, someone gets on stage or they get in front of a meeting or they get in front of 3 people at the holiday thing to give a toast or something. And we often look at the audience as separate than us, which is where that anxiety and that fear can come from, of being good enough and being judged. But what I really think is possible there is that the audience is always a mirror of you.
mm-hmm.
And so being able to learn to express yourself so you can see back your truth, right?
Yeah.
And so you cannot think they're having a separate experience over there watching me, but to say like, this is actually just my own experience of myself a little bit, that's going on. And so they're always a mirror in that way.
Yeah. And there's a vulnerability in doing that I think people can often feel scared about. But I think one of the things I learned, going the training I went through a few years ago, was sort of like, your number one goal is to be in service to the audience. And you're not being in service to the audience if you're hiding things that are going to ultimately help them have their own moments of awakening, or if you're hiding something that because of your own fear or insecurity is actually going to be something that's going to validate them or give them a path or give them a sense of hope. Like you're actually not serving the audience by being in this performance only mode of I must impress you. It's I'm here to serve you, and I want you to walk away feeling seen and feeling heard and feeling understood and feeling maybe catalyzed or opened up in some way, even if you're a bit uncomfortable. Like that's okay.
Yeah. And I would say I would take it even one level deeper than that and say that really what we are in service of, because it could get really tricky, right? Someone maybe watch say, in service of the audience. And then we can trick ourselves into thinking, what does the audience want? We could do these exercises of like, let me understand my ideal customer avatar. She's a 32-year-old woman named Claire with a minivan and 3.5 kids and a schnoodle. And it can really mess with it. And so what I like to think about or do or push people to the edge of is what you're in service to is your story. And if you can get to the realness of it, if you can think about which story, which part of the story, which part of the journey, you will always be in service of the audience, but not if you are in the goal of serving the audience. I think it can come across, and I think that's where we find speakers and people getting to this place, musicians, of like, I hate this. I hate this. I was on the road 100 days last year, and I was telling them what they wanted to hear. I was in service of them, helping them do a thing, but like, I'm empty. And I think really the best way we could be in service of the audience is to get in front of them and see someone who is so in their element, so in themselves, and has unmuted their everything that has stopped their self-expression, which starts way at that beginning ages of our lives. And so I think, yes, the best way for us to be in service of the audience is to be in service of our story.
Well, speaking of, I agree. Speaking of our story, I know that you have, being a consummate storyteller, you're like, I could tell probably 250 stories in a given moment. But today we want to focus specifically on a story that, whichever one feels most compelling, most significant, most meaningful to you in this moment, of a way that you muted yourself in your life and what your journey has been, what your process has been. People are always like, what's the one thing you did? Like, there's never one thing you did. It's like it's forever. Sorry, if you were looking for the spoiler alert, it's forever. This journey is forever. What was the journey that you've been on, that you are on, to continue to unmute that part of yourself?
So I'm going to talk about something I've been on like 500 podcasts, I think, at this point, and even some about parenting. And I've never talked about this. So look at you weaving your little ways into my brain, Rachel. So this is actually one I'm currently on. I'm currently in this story. I don't know the happy ending. I don't know how to tell you what I did, but I can tell you what I'm trying to do and how. What I think sometimes is really helpful with these kinds of things is less of the like dosi machina. That's like that's Latin for essentially like God from machine. And that's that moment in storytelling, in theater, in film where like, and all of the sudden I knew what to do. This is like a lot of times when people are writing customer like a testimonial or a case study. It's like Rachel was struggling with this, and then all of a sudden she found us and she knew what to do. And it's like, that's just not how human life is. What you just said a moment ago, Rachel, of like, it's just not how it is, the easy button bow thing. And so what I like to think about sometimes is the most valuable part of it is like, how did you even notice there was a story here in the first place? Because that could be the trigger for the audience to say, oh, I'm having a similar story, or, oh, I should be looking at that. And sometimes what's most valuable to them is not the 5, 6, 7 things you did, because there's so much context and so many different things about what they can do or not do. And I've learned so much about that the last few years around privilege, and like my 5 steps of what I could do are different than yours or different than someone else's. And so sometimes what's helpful is to say, how did you recognize the story? And how did you recognize there was something worth going to? What was that like? Because I want to hear about that. I don't necessarily need your 7 steps of what you did. I could read the blog post. And so for me, the story I am currently in that I've not ever shared, I grew up with teen parents. My mom was 15 when she had me. My dad was 17. And then 14 years later, I found out that the person who was my dad my whole life was maybe not my dad. And we were moving all of a sudden. It was a very wild time. And we were moving all of a sudden to go live with this other guy who was possibly my biological dad. My mom said, I knew the whole time. I always knew in my soul, kind of thing. And so we sold everything we had. We didn't have a lot. We were living in a trailer with like a car that didn't work, with electricity sometimes not. Not a lot of food, not a lot of anything. And so in a way, there was this moment of like, we're going to move there and it's going to be fairy tale. We're going to move to another trailer from California into the middle of Iowa. And it's going to be like, I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but maybe they'd have electricity, and hot water more often than we did. And so we did this, and then I didn't stay very long. I moved and left to go live with my grandparents. My sister eventually came, and we lived with them the rest of high school and such. And for years, I just never cared. I was like, you know what? This is my dad. This is who I would love to say raised me, but he also didn't. He kind of was around for as long as they were married. And as soon as my parents got divorced when I was 9, he disappeared. And so I would love to say that all of that was clean and easy, but it wasn't. Years later, I'm on an airplane. I meet this woman. This whole thing happens. It's a whole nother, like, no coincidences. You meet people because there's the reason you're on that airplane in that seat, even though I tried to move my seat 30 times. It kept moving me back. The Wi-Fi didn't work on the plane. My headphones died. I didn't have my extra battery. It was like really like, wow, a lot of stuff had to work for me to have this conversation with this woman. And it was a real mystical experience. And she said something about my family lineage. And I was like, I don't know what she's talking about. And I came back and my results had been updated from like 23andMe, which I had done years ago. I was an early adopter. Yeah. And it was like, oh, you've got a new family member. And I was like, oh, who is this new family member? And it was like, oh, this is one of the closest family members in my chain, is that the like person that we moved to go live with, that my mom stayed married to for 10 or 15 years. And eventually they got divorced. His sister is my closest relative on 23andMe after my mom. So I was like, okay, well, that's true. So I got a whole bunch of daddy issues, Rachel. Okay. And I'm writing a book, a 1-person show called The Daddy Issue. And it's all about how we get to choose what we inherit. And this is why. I have a daughter who's 2 years old. And so the story I'm currently in is that those lines of what you inherit because it was done to you, or because it's what you know, or if you really want to go deep and it's like ancestral rooted DNA passed down soul stuff, like wherever you want to go with it, they are real and they are deep. And I have really struggled with being a dad. I love her so much. Love her. She's like the greatest thing in the world. All the things that a dad would say. And every single day I'm learning how to not be my dads, both of them, and how to choose differently, and how to not use those chains that they both used, by the way. Both of the dads used the like, well, my dad and my dad and my dad, the whole thing. How do I get to be the one to break the cycle? And breaking the cycle is really hard. And so the story that I didn't realize, I think as a 40-year-old, I was 40 when she was born, I was like, I have dealt with the trauma, babes. Like, I did the therapy, went to the retreat, cried in the thing, talked to the ayahuasca, met my soul. I have done it all. And like, I am healed by these men. I don't care about these men, whatever. We moved on. Namaste, bless you, bless me, everyone blessed. And I thought I was done, and I was really competent. fully out there person, teaching people, expressing themselves and tapping into who they are. And this little tiny baby came along and said, checkmate. And it has been a real awakening to the depth of some of those stories, the depth of some of those journeys. And so the story that so the way that muted me, by the way, the whole tech there is that I had really muted the part of me that was still hurt. I really muted the part of me that was still broken. And I had muted the part of me that wanted different things than what I had, and some days what I have, because I wasn't giving enough credit, attention, love to the little boy version of me that was still really hurt by that abandonment, by that betrayal, by all of those things. I really had muted that I had any needs in that relationship, and that I just was okay and I was fine. And it really was quite functional. Like most people would be like, wow, like you really are so in touch with all of your stuff. And I think there was that little, and there's still a little cave in there somewhere. I haven't met that demon yet. And I know that it will be through my relationship with my daughter, where she just says like, oh, let's go in this cave. And it's like, no, please let go of my hand. I do not want to go in that one. Because that unmuting, I think, was, and I think it's part of part of our big stories here, that original wound comes back and you have to kind of work through it. We've talked about this as well. And that original wound you come back to and say, okay, there's something in here that is part of what I need to figure out, what I need to sort out. And so I realized through my relationship with my daughter, how much I had muted the way that all of that had affected me. And so every single day, including this morning, I am still working through all of those things. Yeah. So I don't have the nice ABC 1, 2, 3. Here's what you do. And sometimes I read the books of what you do, and I was like, I don't know what hill you're on to heal yourself, but I have a 2-year-old and a job and a client and a this and a that, and I cannot go out to the hill and ascend into the lightness because I've got real stuff here. So that's the messy life today. But the recognition of it came through me saying, I don't want to do this again. And why am I making the same excuses they made?
Wow. There's so much pinging around right now about things I haven't shared with you either also. So first of all, thank you for sharing that. I think that is so powerful. That's going to be so powerful for so many people. It already is. And essentially we were talking about the mirror 5-10 minutes ago. And it's like your daughter gets to be this mirror where it's like, I'm not walking away. Here it is. Oh, no. You can't turn a corner. Here's the mirror. Oh, no. Keep looking. Nope. Here it is. Yep. You can't hide. Is that what it feels like sometimes? Yeah.
And the mirror, even to the parts where it's like, oh, this is really ugly right now. You're really ugly right now, but you have to keep looking because this is where you need to be right now. And so even in those moments where you're like, oh, I don't want to look in the mirror. This is my, there's just no, and there's something really beautiful. I think I'm still sorting this out, of someone holding it up anyway.
Yeah.
Of her holding it up anyway and being like, look, this ugly part is also worth looking at in the mirror.
Yeah.
This ugly part is also worth looking at in the mirror. That's something to hear.
And I'm still here. I'm still holding them. I'm still here I'm with you. It's not judgment. I think if we were to look at those experiences, those moments of people turning the mirror on us.
Yeah.
And saying, they're not here to judge. It takes courage to be willing. Obviously at 2 and 3, you're not thinking that, oh, I'm being very courageous by exposing all this discomfort, and pain. But as we get older, I think so often we just want to shatter all the mirrors that we see anywhere. And we're just I'm not interested, because we're afraid that if we go into that cave, that it's going to be too dark. And we're not going to be able to make it out. So I don't even want to enter the cave because I do not believe I'll be able to get out. And so much of this is, yes, it is this journey of healing and acceptance. And it's repetitive. We keep getting these lessons again and again and again. And, looking at your shadow in the face and not hide that part of us.
Well, and I think that's the thing so much, I do a lot of we do a lot of interesting ways into the work of expressing ourselves.
Mhm.
There's a lot of paths in. And so I think one of the challenges I have so much with the world of like enlightenment and all of those kind of trainings is it treats it that the only way is up, that the only way is up, that the only way is more light, that the only way is ascension. And I really think that's fun. That's such a fundamental error. And I think it's why so many people struggle to heal, is because we're not taught that the other, that it's also down, that it's also into the root, that it's also into the bedrock. And you have to, there is no light without darkness.
Yes.
And I think our job is to take that little light and bring it into the darkness to say, oh, look, it's not that scary in here. It's not that scary in here. But if our whole goal of enlightenment is only upwards and only ascension, then I don't think we're ever really going to be healed. And it takes bringing a light into that darkness. And I think it's why storytelling is such an effective tool for that, because what I think the meaning of life is for us to create the meaning of our life. And we cannot do that if we don't look back and say, okay, well, what was that about? What was that supposed to teach me? What was going on there? And there's a lot of stuff that a lot of people have been through. That's like, someone was teaching that to a child. That's horrible. You know, to leave a child, to hurt a child. What was that child supposed to learn from it? And even in that, there is something. And it doesn't mean that like it was predicated and destined and you were meant to get hurt. You had to get hurt. It means that even though that happened to you, there is a way to find some meaning from it. And it takes bringing that little light into the dark to look around and say, okay, this is pretty bad, but staying in the dark gives it power, you know?
Yes, it does. And there's a heaviness to it that you feel in the dark versus when you're, willing to look at it and willing to, and my therapist that I see is a somatic therapist. So she does a lot of work with mind-body connection. And she also talks about this process of like internal family systems where it's like you have this different parts of yourself, right? Like, well, part of me feels really ugly today. And part of me is embarrassed and ashamed that I even had that thought. And part of me is upset with myself for having that thought. And part of me is relieved that I can tell you that I have that thought. And part of me is really grateful. It's like we can be all of these things. And it's the only way is through kind of thing is very true with this, that the only way to get that experience of healing is to go through those difficult experiences of realization, of self-awareness, of going back with perspective and often better coping mechanisms as adults than we had when we were 6.
Yeah.
To recognize, oh, I can decide the meaning that I make of this. I can choose what to make of this, and I can choose how much I want to dig into this. And I can choose who I want to bring with me along that journey to help me see things I might be missing if I'm not with that person. And so I think it's so powerful what you're doing. And I'm wondering, Mike, like, what are the other ways? What are some of the ways that you think kind of the side effects of muting? What were some of the costs as you look back at your life? What do you feel have been some of the costs of muting that part of yourself, that pain?
I think obviously the lengthening of healing, like the longer time to heal. But I think along the way, one of the things I struggle with still today that I'm learning all the time, I have a really hard time relying on anybody. Like down to, this is even so I'm type 1 diabetic as well. So I need insulin to stay alive. Without it, I won't survive. And I use an insulin pump. Which is giving me a little bit of insulin all the time. It's great, modern device, it's from the 80s, I think. And so one time when we were on a trip in Mexico, we were on our way to like a little cooking school. It's just us and a private rent, we had a driver, just me and my husband going to an event that was just us. There's no one else coming. We had the cooking school for the day. We had the car for the day. And so my insulin pump battery beeped and I had forgotten to put batteries in my bag. And it's like, hey, you got like an hour and I'm going to die. And if I'm not getting insulin, like my blood sugar will skyrocket really fast and I'll possibly be in a coma. There are all kinds of bad things happen. And I'm going to be in the middle of this cooking school in these cenotes in the Yucatan, like in the middle of nowhere. And I struggled as we passed gas station after gas station after gas station. I could not say, hey, I need to pull over because I need to get batteries in a car that I was paying for, going to a school that I was paying for, that was going to take 3 minutes to get a battery. I really struggled even in that minute to say to my husband and the driver, because I didn't want to inconvenience them, hey, I need you to pull over because I need to take care of me. I do not have any issue doing that for anyone else. I do not have an issue being the one to stand up on a plane and being like, this lady needs something, let's help her. But I really struggle with that. And I think that that is part of this journey of thinking that I don't get to have needs, that my needs aren't important. And so I think for such a long time, and I'm still working through this, I really, really struggled to ever advocate for myself in that way, and to allow myself to have feelings that other people might not like. Right. So I think that's been, when I look back now, I realize like, oh, I did that a lot. Interesting. I never would have thought that. If you had asked me 3 years ago, hey, are you, so when we met 4 years ago, if you'd said, hey, are you, I would say, no, I always speak up, stand up. And I do for everybody else. And I really, really struggle to share what I need and to say what I need, even if it's as simple as literally pulling over on the side of the road to get batteries to live, like to survive. I really struggle with that. Yeah.
Yeah. This isn't like, I'm in the mood for a burger, stop at McDonald's. It's like, no. Like, this is a matter of life or death. I need batteries.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if it was a car full of strangers, who cares? But like literally in a car that I was paying for with my husband, going to a cooking school that I was paying for the full day, I struggled to say, hey, I have a need. And I could see that over and over in all kinds of places in my life. I think I really creatively got around it in lots of ways. The performer side of me, the side of me that was in service to the audience, says, ooh, the audience wants someone to laugh, to make them have fun, to be funny, to say something. I'll always be in service to the audience. And I struggled a lot and still struggle to be in service sometimes to my own story. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because we perceive people to be certain ways, right? Like we look at somebody and we're like, oh, well, you've got this thing figured out. Like I generally don't believe people that say they have anything figured out. And back to the piece about emotions that you were saying, Janine has a little daughter who I've gotten videos from and pictures. She's drawn me pictures and sent me these through LinkedIn. And, her daughter asked her, right, Mom, do you wish you could be happy all the time? She said, no, right? Happy is one of many emotions we're privileged to feel, but all the other emotions and feelings are important too. To be really happy, you have to know true sadness. To be really afraid, you have to know what it feels to be safe and secure. I'm here to walk beside you through all of it and help you learn to cope with all these different experiences. Like how the world would change if that's what parenting looked like.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Like there's a book called Permission to Feel that Mark Brackett wrote a couple of years ago that I love. There's another one by a guy named, I think his name's Mark Wolin. It Didn't Start With You. It's a book called It Didn't Start With You, which like really helps us look back at the roots of these things and how often those experiences have replicated themselves somewhere along our ancestry. Like we're not the first person to be the one that doesn't ask for help or that doesn't express a need or that is afraid will be a burden or an inconvenience or that someone will be disappointed in us if we're not 100% self-sufficient.
And we live in a society that promotes that. Like as much as there's a whole industry of people with the books and the everything, the programs, we live in a world, especially in the United States, that survives on capitalism. Okay. And which says your needs don't matter as much as the needs of this facility, as much of the needs of this line, as much of the needs of this restaurant. I worked in the restaurant industry forever. Talk about not being allowed to have needs. Talk about not being allowed to have a sick day. If people knew how often, I think before COVID, people didn't think about this, how often the people serving your food are very, very sick. Like all the time in every range of restaurants. And so we live in a society that also says your needs are important, but they're not as important as everyone else. They're not as important as the machine. They're not as important as this thing. Don't get too cute. Don't think so highly of yourself. Don't toot your own horn. All of those things. It's not just people who've been through some stuff that make them feel that way. The entire ecosystem we're in supports that kind of message all of the time. And so it's really hard not only to say, I'm dealing with that in myself. I've got that from this relationship with this person or that person, but you also live in an environment that promotes that everywhere you turn.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that Gabor Mate was on a podcast. It might've been with Tim Ferriss. I forget who he was talking to, but he used this phrase, or it might have been in his book, The Myth of Normal, of something that I like wrote it down immediately. So I was like, this has been my journey, and it's a super autonomous self-sufficiency. Where we just feel like if it's like, if it's to be, it's up to me. And so I'm just gonna, not have needs, or if I have needs, then I'm needy. Ugh, who likes that person? That can be another experience we have. So I'm curious, because I know like a lot of the sessions that I do, I'll often invite people to think about like, what are ways that you actually need help? Like, what are you not asking for that you've told yourself you can't have? And like, and what would happen? What's the worst case scenario if you communicate a need and express what you want or think or feel? And, I find that a lot of times it's what you're saying, the reasons why people hold back. And I've really learned to, I'm curious about what your experience has been of how you've journeyed through this. Cause I think for me, it took burning out and getting mono 6 years ago when I couldn't do much of anything for myself. I mean, I lost my voice. I was totally depleted. I had no energy. I didn't feel like myself at all. And I was at a point where and then when I broke my back 3.5 years ago, I was fully dependent. I mean, like to get up to go to the bathroom, and you have to learn. It's like, if you hadn't learned it before, here's the lesson. Here's the thing that you're going to learn. So I'm curious, what are some of the ways you've been practicing that? Cause I know that's helpful for people here that I'm sure other people that are with us today have like struggled with communicating needs. Feel free to let us know if you have, but I'm sure everyone does at some point. So yeah, it's been your journey.
I think that, for it's been such an interesting microclimate, because so much of this like thing has been part of my having my daughter, this big waking up, right? So we had a baby during COVID, the height of COVID, August of 2020, who was born 3 months early. So we had a NICU baby born 3 months early in the middle of a global pandemic where the hospital systems were obviously very affected. We weren't able, by the way, the three of us were never in the same room until we brought her home. They wouldn't allow two parents in the NICU. So we never, ever, the three of us as a family were together as a family until we brought her home from the hospital that day. And then we finally were all three in the same room. So in a way, my husband and I were also going through that stress alone, even in there. And so it's a really interesting thing, because would my answer be very different to this question if we weren't doing it in a global pandemic? If it, like we got down to where it was like, we were interviewing nannies and it's like, this doesn't actually feel really safe because they aren't, they're not going to live with us. They're going to live wherever they live. And it ended up being like, this just doesn't feel safe. And so I was stay-at-home dad for a year. So talk about, hey, let's talk about, you got needs, you have no needs. You're going to have to do this. And so it really was an interesting microclimate to say, oh, like you were saying, you didn't hear this lesson before. Let us put it on a billboard. Let us put it on every billboard. Let us put it on every billboard, every show, and every single thing you go through, because that's exactly what was happening. And so I think what I'm learning, it's not learned, it's learning, is I mean, some things have been in my business that like I schedule my business a certain way, because I realize even there I'd be like, oh, you want to call at 7 a.m.? No problem. I'll sort it out. And I was running around to like deal with East Coast clients to do it. And it's like, you know what? I can't do those things. So I think I probably started there to just kind of put some boundaries in place that made it so I didn't have to say no to anybody, but just was like, when you look at the scheduling thing, it ain't possible. And so little things like that were like easier to do. And then at home, I mean, I'm still in the middle of this journey of like being able to say to my husband, hey, I need you to get up earlier, because I usually do the mornings. He's stay at home now. I'm not. And so I need you to wake up a little earlier because I've got to get to this thing, or I need you to do this with me because it's a lot. But it's still really hard. That's still really hard. I think the takeaway, I guess, for someone listening, if they're like, hey, guest, say something helpful here. The helpful thing I could say is recognizing the trigger is maybe, it goes back to what I said at the beginning of like, in your story, sometimes it's not the 1, 2, 3, what do I do? It's recognizing, oh, this is one of those things. This is a story. So for me, it's been recognizing how do I start to get out of control when I'm feeling like I don't have my needs met? So I can recognize it there. And then, there may be 20 different ways to get them met. Whatever book you read that tells you a method, it's perfect, but it's only going to work if you have the inner thing to say, that's not true. I'm having a thing. This is a trigger moment. Let me think about this so I can, whatever, there's 27 steps to saying what you need. All of them are correct.
Sure.
But it is not helpful if you don't first recognize, whoops, this is not real. How I'm feeling is not real. Me feeling frustrated right now is something else. This isn't actually happening. I'm not unsafe. Okay, now let me go pick up the book and do the 27 things. But if you don't recognize it first, it doesn't help. And so for me, I think that's been the biggest thing, is recognizing, these are the behaviors I take when I am starting to feel out of control and starting to feel like I don't have my needs met. So I'm starting to feel resentful. I'm starting to feel like a scared little boy again. I'm starting to feel like it's all going to end. This is futile. The world's ending.
Yeah.
That to me is the most helpful thing, is recognizing what are the 1, 2, 3 go-to behaviors. So I could say, this is a thing. Let me now explore it. And it's really similar to storytelling, honestly, because there's a million books of like how to tell a story. And here's the framework. And if you do a hero's journey, or you do a beginning, middle, and end, my coffee this morning had a beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't make it good. And so we have all these here's the framework, here's the 7 steps, here's all the things, but it doesn't matter. None of those matter. And all of them work until you recognize there's a story here. There's a dramatic question being asked here that I can put into a story. None of the rest of it matters. There's a million books on how to write screenplays. I'm working on I want to write a Christmas movie. This is something I'm working on. It's the easiest screenplay to sell, by the way. So because it's really easy to understand, in service of the audience, what the audience wants in a Christmas movie. Don't get cute, don't get funny, give us the movie and just write good characters. So there's a million books on screenplays, on how to write a screenplay, on how to format it, on how to tell a story, all of those things, but none of them matter if you do not recognize, there's a story here. And the same thing with healing, or with going through this process of being able to advocate for myself or say what I need. None of those steps matter. None of the books matter if you aren't able to say, hold on, this is the thing happening right now. And to me, that's been the most powerful way to get through and to try all the different methods. Does this work? Does this work? Can I express what I need this way or that way? But the real linchpin was the recognizing, this is not a real thing. Let me see what's going on here.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what I'm hearing you say, Mike, is something that is around connecting to a sense of curiosity, just the way, and it's not that you never judge yourself. When we're going through hard things, it's human to judge ourselves, be like, why do I keep doing this? What is wrong with me? Why can't I just get past this stupid thing? It's natural to get frustrated with ourselves when we're in a change process. And I can sense, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I can sense that the lens through which you're going through this journey is a lens of genuine curiosity. Is that what it feels like? Or does it feel something different?
Sometimes. Sometimes it feels like no, it does. And there's also, I think the curiosity for me comes from one wanting to really explore the edges of my own expression, the edges of my own feeling, the edges of my own truths, I guess. I think the curiosity comes from there, but also from wanting to be able to make meaning of it all, and I think that's the same thing again with storytelling, to connect it back to that, even, is that's where great storytelling will come from. And that's where great self-expression comes from, is getting to the edges of what's possible for you, what's knowable to you. That's where that all comes from. And I guess that is, in most days, a sense of curiosity of, what would it look like if I went to this far? What would happen if I went over here? And it's really interesting, even in the professional work, how often people, even in just a two-way conversation, are scared to go that far. And it's we're just talking, you and me, about exploring what's the story here. And it's really scary for people to go that far. I think because sometimes we don't know. I don't know if I'll recognize when I've gone too far and then I'm going to get hurt. Yeah. And so recognizing that linchpin moment, I think, is really critical to say, okay, this is the edge. I'm at the edge. I'm good right now. Let's go backwards. I think is a real key there. And, you know, it's funny too, you had Gabor's book, The Myth of Normal there. And in that book, he talks about, I think we've talked about this before, how early on we trade our authenticity for attachment, right? For love. I think that's all. Now I'm sounding like A Course in Miracles. It all comes down to love. But
of course, Marianne Williamson.
If you think about it, self-expression is often the very first thing we mute. It is. We're little and we come out expressing. We come out crying, wailing, touching, feeling, holding. And that whole first 6 months is getting to the boundaries of that, getting to the edges of that, of like, what is the way my voice can? And you see the babies looking at their hands and like, oh, what is this can move? What can that move? How can I go this way? How can I do rollover? How can I scream? And we keep going through that. And at some point somebody says, good little girls don't scream. Good little boys don't cry when they want a cookie. Shut up, be quiet, don't yell, don't do this. And we are muted in almost every family in some way. Nobody survives childhood unmuted. This is why we need you so desperately. We need you so desperately. Nobody survives childhood unmuted because it's just not possible. Part of it is the normal things we need to learn to live in a civilized place. Part of it is we live in a bubble of capitalism that says your body, your time, your energy is for sale. And part of it is just the normal, you're dealing with other humans who are your parents, and sometimes they can't handle any more yelling that day.
Yes.
And all of those are, and some of it is much more extreme and dangerous. And our self-expression is the very first thing that gets muted.
Yes.
And then I think we have to work the entire rest of our lives to turn up the volume.
Yes. Yes. Hey, what do they call it? What's a mic drop moment? I feel like that's what you talk about.
I should have a podcast, right?
Or something like that.
I'm gonna take that on advice there.
It's true that it's so true. And we learn directly and indirectly, right? Like I was recently around a situation where there was a young boy, 2-year-old, in a room of adults, and he was upset about something. He started crying and the adults laughed. And I was like, no, like I was in that moment, just like, it went into sort of like, it's not even my kid, but in the just protective mode of like, you cannot laugh at somebody when they're being emotionally expressive, especially when they're 2 and they have no self-regulation. Like, you know, but that's not totally abnormal. It's like, we're uncomfortable. The yelling, the laughing at other people is a reflection of our own discomfort with our own inability to sit with hard and big emotions.
Yeah.
Like that's what it is.
Our own inability to go back and say, what was that like? What was that like for me? Because we think, again, I might go to the edge there and I might not be able to pull back, you know? And we do that in small ways, very innocent ways of like the little kid falls and you tell them it's okay. And it's like, I get that it is going to be okay. But in that moment, it hurts. It's sad. You know, the expression of a 2-year-old, like, the worst thing she ever experienced was not being able to get the doll she wanted off the shelf. And so that screaming and crying is the same proportionally to something bigger because she just hasn't gone through anything bigger at that moment.
Right.
And it's so easy and so natural to say in this moment, it's okay, don't cry. Because we want to reassure them. We want to comfort them. Maybe we're uncomfortable with those places, but it's a really normal thing to be like, oh, it's okay. And it's like, it will be okay. But in this moment, I'm hurt. In this moment, I'm upset. In this moment, I am feeling something and expressing myself, you know?
Yeah. And it's true. And sometimes, people don't know how to respond, right? Like as Veda mentioned, like they don't know how to handle the emotions that they're feeling. And so they do the thing that temporarily releases that tension, which is laughing as a way of temporarily releasing tension.
Yeah.
And I think also to have compassion, once we realize this about ourselves, I feel like it can also help us have more compassion for other people to say like, this is such hard work. I see a therapist almost every week, you know, and she'll comment like, you have this ability to be really brave and like actually face these things that are really hard. And I said, well, it was so difficult and so painful to not be honest about them and to not feel seen in them. And when you have this moment where you have a witness that's compassionate, that's creating space for you to be seen in a way that you've avoided even seeing yourself, it's transformational.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really nothing like it. And so I want to commend you for this journey that you're on. And I so appreciate how you keep using the, like, I'm learning, like I don't trust people that are like, I figured it out. I'm like, you've stopped learning and you've stopped being curious. I'm really not interested in talking to you.
Yeah. And they also have a program for $14.97 to teach you how to figure it out.
And they have a sale today because it's
Cyber Monday. You can figure your stuff out for half off. Oh, goodness.
It's true though. So I'm curious, like, oh my, I cannot believe, I feel like this is the fastest conversation that I've had. This is the 20th episode of doing the show. I'm like, oh, I thought we were only halfway through. We are almost at the top of the hour, which is wild to me. So I'm curious, Mike, for any kind of final thoughts. We're going to drop in, and hey, Eric, well, good to see you here. And Tim is going to drop in your link so people can connect with you. It's just at Mike Ganino, basically everywhere. We're going to put your website link in there. We're going to put your LinkedIn link in there, all that stuff for people to connect with you. But I'm curious, last question I'd like to get your thoughts on. What would you, if somebody else, this is not to be prescriptive, maybe what's a question that you'd ask, an insight that you share, just even something that's been revealing and helpful for you, to someone else who is in a position of muting their needs for any reason, what might you share with them from your own experience and perspective that might be helpful?
I think the big question there, and the answer is always some version of love, is when were those first moments? What were those first times where you started to realize you couldn't have needs? And what was the cost if you did? Because I think the unraveling starts there, that awareness. And how will you unravel? I don't know. You'll pick one of the 27 million books out there and you'll read the 7 steps and you'll go through the thing and you'll stumble and you'll say, not for me, this is for me. But none of those matter if you can't first say, what was that likely little kid, probably some age between like 7 and 10, who had this experience that said to you, and this is even if it's not just the needs thing, if you look at yourself and you're like, huh, why am I this way? There's probably something between 7 and 10 years old, by the way, where you go through and you say, what was that first initial biggest thing that started me on this path? Why did it become unsafe for me? Almost all the distortions we have are from unsafety. Why was it unsafe for me to have needs? And probably somewhere in there you have the magic elixir that you need to start to unravel this thing and to do the work you need to do. I think it starts there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's getting back to the roots is really what it is. Because until we get at the fundamental belief that's beneath the thing, we're going to continue to have the same things that are going to trigger us. And we're like, why is that happening? But to have the curiosity and the compassion to go back and look at the experience and to notice, right? That's what curiosity is, noticing without judging. And so what you're advocating for is just being genuinely curious about your own experience and about your own life. And I think recognizing, Toby had mentioned this a little while ago, and this is something I've learned in my experience as well, is that I think about the number of times when I've been able to genuinely help somebody who had a need, whether it was a very tactical, basic need, or whether it was something deeper and more emotional, and how much meaning I derived out of the moments when I could sort of, fill that role or meet that need for that person, whether it was an emotional need or otherwise. And that gift is something that we can give somebody else. Like we give other people the opportunity to feel useful and to have their own sense of meaning by being able to stand in for us in some way, whether it's something small or something significant. And like, that's really, it's just this constant experience of reciprocity, not so that we'll get something, but because it's so rewarding when we have an experience where we see someone has a need that we can meet. They trust us enough to communicate that need to us. We get to step in, and then that's something that can deepen the connection in the relationship.
I think that's right. And we are not We're not separate. We are not separate. That's the big lie. The big lie is that we're all separate. We're not.
Yeah, we're not separate. So just be everyone who's with us today and who might be going back and watching or listening to the replay of this, be a bit gentler and kinder to yourself and each other, recognizing that all of us are dealing with some version of something painful that we may not be able to see in ourselves or in each other, but to stay curious and to stay open and receptive, to be able to have these experiences that can take you on this healing journey, because I can't think of anything that makes us feel more alive than to be in the experience of healing.
Amen. That's a mic drop.
Well, Mike Ganino, thank you so much for being here today. It's been such a joy. I feel like we could talk for another hour, but we're at time. So
Part 2, 2023.
Part 2. I was like, there's more to say. Well, I'm going to have a totally new reworked Unmute Yourself keynote as a result of our work together, where I'm going to go even deeper than I've ever gone. So there will be a part 2. This is part 1. There will be a part 2 once that's all ready. So Mike, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful. Pamela, Aaron, Veda, Eric, Tim, our host with the most. Anna has been here. Just Janine, all of you. Thank you so much. Toby, for being a jury. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us for this conversation. It has been a joy, and we will see you back here in 2 weeks for an interview with my dad. Thanks, everybody.